it got very quiet
It
in
did.
here.
Everyone's
It's very,
gone.
everyone's, I don't know if it's nap time or people are in sessions. We're in a lot. It was so loud this morning. I don't even know if anyone could hear us, but now I can hear everything.
Now I feel like I have to whisper.
Yes, now
You
this will
know.
be the quiet part of the broadcast. So we got, how much time, where are we at here time wise? Want to make sure we
We
stay on
are
track.
25 after.
We
So
got our first question on social media.
we did.
We did. I'm actually, I told you I would check these hashtags. I am actually there. Jeff White, who is the co-founder of Valor Cybersecurity, asked about our thoughts on CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams. I know what CERT stands for because there's a giant sign across the street of us that has CERT. So there's CERT in the United States. I know there's also CERT in Canada. He asked what our thoughts were on CERT. So I'll start with Alex. Do you know what CERT is? We'll start with that.
You're gonna have to ask the question again because I was taking care of some technical stuff.
Alex was busy ignoring me. We're only an hour two. Community emergency response teams. Do you know what? Are you familiar with that term or those organizations?
I know what they are.
Okay.
And to be honest, here in Canada, I don't
See,
hear.
there's one right over there. So you can't. It's right on the side of the van. So you can't say there's not any in Canada.
I
I'm
didn't
looking
say
at
I
one.
didn't say that there wasn't any in Canada. I'm not as familiar with them up here. I seem to be more familiar with what's going on in the U.S. and some other countries. In Canada, I don't think they're promoted enough because of what we're looking at. It looks like an ambulance. So
Yes.
I always equate ambulance with a hospital.
Okay. So, yeah, they may be different throughout North America. That's interesting. So the CERT, the community emergency response teams that I'm familiar with, that they have in Florida are, you have a group of vetted volunteers, so just civilians, but they are trained on different aspects of emergency response and disaster response, usually by the local first responders. And
Mhm.
so the thought is, and then that if there's an incident, if there's a disaster, if something happens, that CERT team can then deploy and assist the community. Certainly, the CERTs I've been involved in Florida are much more casual than the operational support van across the hall with flashing lights and looks straight out of a sci-fi movie. Alex and I will definitely be over there later today. But I think to me, anytime the community can be involved in response, in preparation, in risk in mitigation, it's a good thing. And
Mhm.
to your point, yeah, certs are not as widely advertised as they should be. They're kind of hard to find. They're maybe often hard to get into. I would love to see those kind of community-based programs be expanded. It's some of the most effective response. I did a workshop with FEMA looking at the response after Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, and Louisiana is divided by, instead of counties, they're called parishes, and there was some analysis of certain parishes that were more resilient than others, and it basically came down to the community being part of preparation and response, being active parts of both of those and not passive. Kevin Newman said it great, people sitting around waiting for the power to come on versus people in Ukraine just taking charge of doing what they needed to do and not necessarily letting the government help
Yeah,
them, because when you have a widespread issue, the government can't get to everyone.
that's right.
So
Yeah, with certs, I tend to think of the local Red Cross, the local government officials and agencies there. Um, I don't think of my neighbors, which is what some groups are, but usually, which are with loose groups, informal, I guess is probably the better word, would be informal. And formal CERT groups, you're right, it kind of difficult to know who is a part of that. Is anybody in my neighborhood a part of that? If it's neighborhood driven or if it is just local to a town or a city, who's really a part of that? And when I actually did years ago check to see about something with that in Guelph, and really that were just listed were St. John's Ambulance, Red Cross, and a couple of other agencies that were a part of it. And I thought, oh, so it's not really a community like me. It would be more agency based. And that's kind of the perception that I've had ever since. And I'm not saying I'm I'm 100% right or I'm 100% wrong. That's just a perception that I had based on that search years ago.
So I'd love to hear from the audience if you are part of your local CERT or if you've ever heard of CERT. Let us know.
If you're a part, I'd love to know how you became a part of a CERT. How you got involved and how they grow that. How do they test that? Because obviously, like any group, people are coming and going. So how do you keep it going? And bring in new ideas and things like that. So I would be interested in hearing that too.
Exactly. I'm just checking to hear if we have any additional questions, any new questions. By the way, Alex doesn't know I recorded some videos. He's just seeing them now on my screen outside his car, which I'm sure he's going to have some
Great.
comments about.
Hopefully my car's
later.
in there.
No, I don't have your license plate. I respected your privacy for the most part.
Most part. Oh, okay.
For the most part. Yeah. Okay. No other questions so far. So we've spoken a bit about for me, this is a snowstorm. I mean, I was born and raised in Michigan, but I've been a Florida boy for a very long time. So a half inch of snow, I'm excited. I was ready to get out there, make some snowmen. But thinking about the weather and looking at, we've had some interesting tropical storms and hurricanes this season. We had Hurricane Ian, which I think most people are very familiar with the impacts of Hurricane Ian in Florida. But also we had Hurricane Fiona, which was the most devastating in terms of financial impact hurricane to ever hit Canada.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks ago, we had Hurricane Nicole. So a lot of areas that were still removing debris and still recovering from Ian were impacted by Nicole. I know in our neighborhood, we have some neighbors who are very excited about Christmas and the holidays. And so the day after Halloween, November 1st, they put up all their Christmas decorations. And for the first time in my lifetime, I saw people who had to take Christmas decorations down because a hurricane was coming. And I wish I had a picture I could share right now. We found there was like a Santa on one of the streets. Nobody ever claimed it. So it blew in from another neighborhood. I never thought we'd be talking about hurricanes in Canada. I never thought we'd be talking about hurricanes and Christmas at the same time. So I wanted to pose to you, with climate change and with these increasingly erratic tropical systems, the classic hurricane system of season of June 1 through November 30th, technically, but a peak of the second and third week in September, and only looking at certain parts of North and Central America. Do we need to reevaluate that? Is hurricane season going to become like, will the season ever end?
Well, I know the East Coast in Canada, especially Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick, that were hit by Fiona. They're going to be looking at this because they usually get, quote unquote, the remnants of a hurricane. And usually that hurricane has already hit Florida or Georgia or someplace along the East Coast. And you end up with just strong rainstorms and windstorms in the Maritimes. Sometimes up here in Toronto and Guelph, we'll get the northern edge of a rainstorm. However, Fiona was completely different, missed all the US states.
Yes.
You got some rain along the coast and things, but the whole hurricane situation was different because it was a full-fledged hurricane that hit the East Coast. That is something that they are not prepared for.
Correct.
And unfortunately, there were some deaths and a tremendous amount of damage. I don't know if you ever saw some of the pictures
Yeah, I did.
that
Yeah.
came out, and it was, if you've seen the East Coast homes, a lot, the nice, beautiful, bright colored homes, wood homes on stilts by the coast, just devastated. Homes, they're not used to that. So if, as you mentioned, the season seems to be starting a little bit earlier, going a little bit longer, then yeah, there's going to be some changes on the East Coast, and some of these areas are going to look at it saying, well, with all these hurricanes and a longer season, we may get hit again now. So do we build stronger homes further inland now? Do we change the way we build our homes? Do we start looking into evacuation plans or things like that? Because if Fiona can happen once, it could happen again. And unfortunately, that's what happens in Florida and Georgia and places down there a lot. And you experience that, more than once a year.
We do at this point, yeah. And I think it's causing, it's certainly causing my family, it's certainly causing a lot of people to reevaluate where they choose to live. So when Hurricane Irma happened in 2017, I've spoken about this before. It did a lot of damage. It did a lot of emotional and mental damage to a lot of people. And at the time, we looked at it as a once in a generation storm, a
I
once in
don't
a
think there's
20
any
year
such thing
storm.
anymore.
And yeah, exactly. So my family and I are like, okay, let's be honest, this sucks. There's no way around it. You have a lot of death and destruction. It's not a desirable or risk safe situation you want to be in. But I think you kind of mentally compartmentalize or say, okay, well, every 20, 30 years, this horrible thing happens. And it's amazing how we can just rationalize things. But my family started, speaking after Ian, like, okay, this once in a generational thing, Irma, it's been 5 years. And then Nicole came along 42 days later. So if once generational becomes the new normal, and we love talking about the new normal, all of us, I'm very confident that my family will move somewhere else. But we have the luxury of doing that. I work remote. I just need an internet connection and a camera. Sometimes I don't even need the camera, as we found out this morning. And I can relocate where I work. My kids are about to graduate high school, so we're not tied to a school district in the next 2 years. But a lot of families don't have those options. And I wonder what's going to happen as people's maybe desire to live certain places, the Sunshine State, no longer desirable because we get hit by a hurricane every 3 days, every week. You're going to see people leave who can leave.
Actually, it's interesting you just mentioned that, because with Fiona hitting the East Coast and those poor people in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick, every year they get hit with massive snowstorms,
Yes.
especially the last few years.
Yeah.
Big, big storms. And because of the pandemic, there's a lot of people from Ontario moving that way.
Okay.
So now it's kind of the opposite of what you were saying. More people are moving into those areas. So will that now contribute to changes to some of the existing plans and responses? Because now there's more people. The people that are there have, I don't know how they do it, but they survive every year these terrible storms. They've been able to go through it. Now there's more people coming in. So is there going to be a review of some of these situations like the Fiona, not looked at as a one-off, because hey, Fiona's hitting us, it's only a few weeks or 2 months later that we start getting snowstorms. So what are we going to start preparing for the winter earlier now because of situations like Fiona, because storms come earlier, like Nicole just a week ago, week and a half ago? Do we look at that as part of hurricane season? It's not it's the end of October, right? Right, something like that. November 1st is supposed to be the end,
Allegedly. Yeah.
allegedly. So now we'll look into mid-November. Well, mid-November is winter.
Yeah.
Really up here. So I think there is going to be a change in the way some of this is going to be looked at now, because it's not a distinct start end, anymore. It's going to be continuous.
Yeah, I think the U.S. NOAA states that hurricane season in the United States ends November 30th, so it runs June. But for all practical purposes, prior to the last couple of years, as a Floridian, you always knew if you got to the end of September, that's when the worst things happen. If you look at some of the most catastrophic storms in the United States and Mexico and the Caribbean, they're historically August, September.
Yeah.
So if you get to September 30th, didn't matter what NOAA said, you were good to go. But now, to your point, how do you prepare for Hurricane Fiona and a winter storm within a 2 week time period?
Yeah.
Those are two very different hazards, and now you're going to have people, and you're going to have these areas of Canada that now have to prepare for both simultaneously.
Yeah. And it took weeks for some of these areas to get power back.
Yeah.
There were, I don't know about Ian, but I know with Fiona, there were some communities almost 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
Before they got power. Well, at this time of year, with winter kicking in, it's kicking in here, with snow outside right now. On the East Coast, they get bigger storms. And how are you going to go from that, a summer quote storm, like a hurricane, and then right into winter? So there's going to have to be a look at some of the responses and new ways of dealing with things, new ways of building homes, new regulations are going to come into effect, all kinds of response capabilities. As I said, with people moving into those provinces now, there's going to be more people, a greater demand for some of this, because a lot of people that are moving out that way are actually becoming remote workers, as you described.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a whole, not just a procedural change and review, but there's going to be a mindset change, I think, on the East Coast, especially with some of these climate change initiatives that are happening, and impacts that are happening, sorry, I should say, and what is currently in place right now.
And I think, we're going to see what we saw with Nicole. There's some aspects of cleanup and restoration that are going to be problematic. So there's an area of Florida, the central part of the state, Polk County. They'd been cleaning up debris from Hurricane Ian. They had trucks running, I was reading, every day. So every day of the week. 42 days later, they still hadn't cleaned up all the debris, not from a lack of action, but just from the sheer amount of debris. Hurricane Nicole comes in, you've still got trees that have been cut down. Now they're blowing around. And then from a restoration standpoint, I saw several buildings in Daytona Beach, Florida, that had to be evacuated prior to Hurricane Nicole. They had suffered some damage from Ian, so they were still relatively safe, if you want to use that word, to be inhabited by families or businesses. But the restoration and refortification of some of that structural damage hadn't been completed. And with Nicole coming, the Volusia County and the city of Daytona Beach and city of Daytona said, hey, you have to evacuate these buildings because they've been stressed or slightly damaged, and now just a little damage will hit them. And we certainly saw that around the state of Florida with Nicole, as it was the end of the rainy season, just a few inches of rain in areas that are already saturated or prone to flooding. There was a lot of damage. So
yeah, that's happening quite a bit in. They're announcing lunch.
Most important announcement of the day. Dan Joyce with CRT just advising the exhibitors that if they want lunch, they should get it now. Yes. Very smart.
Because it'll probably be gone really
He's
quick.
A smart man.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. These, like you mentioned, the frequency. I think this once in a generation, once in a lifetime things. Forget it. Those all that stuff is gone. It's happening way too much. Look at the floods in Australia. I've been to Lismore, and they've had 2 big floods over the last 5 years. Before that, it was decades. And I saw the markers on the telephone pole. It was just a few feet below the top of the telephone pole, and that's as high as it got at one point. Well, apparently it was even worse this time around. And a bridge that I was standing on, looking at this telephone pole back, 5-6 years ago, was all covered. The bridge, everything. So it's getting worse, and they're expecting floods again soon. So it's this once in a generation thing. It's really out the window. There's no such thing as once in a generation anymore, because it's happening every couple of years. And I think we need to think of plans and responses, and looking at these threats in a whole new way, not as in if, but really when.
Yeah. And it's
You
going
know,
to change a lot of aspects of our industry. So if you look at the actuarial tables that insurance company use for flood insurance, and you have these, oh, you're in a floodplain where it can be hit once every 500 years or 100 years or 50 years. Those are all going to, like you said, those are all going to go out the window. How are insurance companies going to determine, and how are they going to assess these increasingly volatile and erratic risk? Is going to be
are they even
interesting.
going to? Are they going to say, because of where you are, too bad. It's happening too much. We can't
Yeah.
afford it anymore.
And
Or your insurance rates are going to be so much you can't afford insurance.
we're seeing that in another industry, the cyber insurance, cybersecurity insurance industry. A lot of providers have gotten out of that industry, and a lot of
Mhm.
those providers are being consolidated because 5 years ago that was a random one-off thing, and now it happens every day. And insurance companies, just no matter how much they raise their premiums, are not able to keep ahead of that. So it'll be interesting to me is in a lot of these areas, if companies will pull out of business interruption insurance or flood insurance. We certainly see that in Florida. After every hurricane, there are companies that exit the business, like we no longer insure homes or buildings
Yeah.
in Florida, but they probably never contemplated having those conversations for, like you said, the areas impacted by Fiona.
Yeah. They never would have had that conversation about a major hurricane coming through, because they've never had one. They've
Yeah.
always had the aftermath, not the actual hurricane. So, well, James, we've actually come to the end of our second hour, sponsored by Basecamp.
Yeah, want to thank Basecamp Connect again for sponsoring this hour. Basecamp Connect simplifies radio, voice, and data communications by connecting otherwise incompatible mutual aid partners through portable and autonomous systems designed to assist public safety entities to deliver timely and accurate interventions. Thank you, Basecamp Connect. You can check them out at basecampconnect.com.
And check out Francis's talk a little earlier. And we'll be taking about a 10-15 minute break, and we'll be coming back with hour 3. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.